and starting it from now. Okay, so people are still flooding in. We're about halfway there. But in the meantime, I am going to start and let's kick this one off. So good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us here today. I'm seeing a lot of students joining us here, which is fantastic. A lot of level 3 students, a lot of level 4 students. I see already that we've got people joining here from Kenya. Good morning, Wanjiru. Lovely to have you here. She teaches WSET in Kenya, and she's got her first level 3 course running at the moment, which is fantastic. So hopefully she's joining and bringing some of her students with her as well. I know that we've got people scheduled to join from France, from the UK, from Zanzibar. Fantastic, Catherine. Very good. There we go. And John Gill from London. Excellent. So, and also people saying that we're going to join us from Canada, but at Canada it's 4 o'clock in the morning. So you really are joining from Canada. Then my hat's off to you. I hope you definitely start with the fizz right now, because frankly, you're earning it. Okay. So the whole point of this 2 hours or however long we go on for this morning is based on WSET. So I know that we do have a lot of students here, and we have a lot of people who are not students, and both of those are absolutely great. We're very, very happy to have you. But what we're looking at here is we're going to start on the level 3 sparkling session, and we're going to go through all the different steps of the sparkling wine, and then we're going to expand it slightly so it makes a bit more sense for people who are level 4. And then I know we have some MW students joining us as well. Hi Laurie, I can see you tuning in there from Durban. So good to see you too. All right, so if you have got your cameras on, can you mute your cameras, take your cameras off, because it will just make it a little bit clearer for our screens here, and to sort of click through. And we're all on mute, so if you want to chat, you need to fire up that chat box in the corner so that you can talk to everybody and put your chats up there in the corner. All right. Okay, so we're going to get started then, and I'm going to be very happy to introduce Pieter Ferreira. And if you don't know Pieter Ferreira and you drink bubbles, you really, really need to know Pieter Ferreira. So Pieter Ferreira has been the cellar master of Graham Beck wines here in South Africa for more than a quarter of a century now. Before that, he was making wine at various other places, but it's always been bubbles, hence the nickname Bubbles Ferreira. So he really is the absolute best person we could get to talk about making sparkling wine here in SA. He's the head of the Classique Association. But one of the things that I'm hoping that we're going to get to later on in this discussion is not just how he makes wines here in South Africa, but also how he makes wines around the world, because Pieter is on a perpetual search for the perfect bubble. And he doesn't believe it starts and ends in South Africa. So with that in mind, he also makes sparkling wines in North America, and he's making them in the UK as well. So what we're going to move into a little bit further on in this presentation is going to be his experiences of making wine in those 2 countries, how it differs from South Africa, what different factors come into play, and on top of that, he obviously has a huge knowledge of making sparkling wines everywhere else in the world as well. So don't be surprised if we don't chuck in a little bit of Cava here and there, and a little bit of Franciacorta. All of those I'm sure are going to come into the mix at some point this morning. Okay, so Pieter's going to be basically leading it. I will be chirping from the cheap seats and asking your questions for you. So he doesn't need to follow the chat. I'll be interrupting and asking those questions. If we don't answer your question immediately, it's not because we're ignoring you, okay? But it might be that it's going to be more relevant later on in the discussion, so we'll come back and we'll answer it there, all right? So we will get to everyone's questions over the session. We do want you to ask questions. The whole point of this is that it is a very educational seminar. We're not just here to hear all the fantastic tales that I know Pieter's got to tell us. We are here to hopefully get a lot of information from him, particularly around why does he do stuff. Okay, so this is really the focus. This is what WSET is all about when we're doing these 2 sessions. Why is he doing these things? Why is he making those choices? What difference is that going to make to the final wine that he's actually going to make at the end of the day? All right, excellent. I see you guys are joining us in. That's lovely. Take your videos off for me there, folks, and then we just clear up the screens. Take your videos off, and we're going to carry on and chat through chat. All right, everybody got Pieter's presentation up on their screens? Yes? Yes, 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 yes. Please, hopefully, if you haven't, say no quickly. But hopefully you can all see the WSET discussion, bottle fermentation, Cat Classique in South Africa. Yeah, there we are. Right, so that's enough from me because I'm really not as interesting as Pieter. Over to you, Pieter. Off you go.
Cathy, thank you for the opportunity. It's really great. And I'm so happy that so many people all over the world has signed in. Obviously, when I and Cathy discussed this, we thought that we will concentrate on level 3, which obviously is the module on sparkling wine session 14. And, you know, I will be going into a lot more detail, and obviously, as Cathy has mentioned, use your chat button to express some points there. And obviously, if we don't discuss everything in detail and there's some detail missing, it's your opportunity to put questions forward, and we'll definitely have a question and answer session at the end of it. But it's obviously much better to follow the process of bottle fermentation, which is obviously the one we are going to discuss. And I've got some beautiful slides that will give you sort of a virtual understanding of everything. So I hope you enjoy the presentation, and please feel free to ask your questions in the chat box. So
okay, is everybody on mute? Everyone needs to be on mute except for Pieter, Pierre and me, okay? I don't know if you've got anything else going on in with you, Pieter. There's a little bit of an echo, but it is getting better. So maybe just speak close to your mic. Okay, off we go.
I will, yeah, I will definitely make sure that I'm at full volume. So hopefully there is. We had some issues earlier this morning, but obviously sparkling wine, there's various ways to get bubbles into a bottle. Sort of the easiest way is carbonated, where you have a pressurized tank, you inject the CO2 into the wine and then obviously bottled under pressure, and we call it normal sparkling wine. Then you have also seen in your module that they talk of the method, which is a partial fermentation in tank and then bottled under pressure into the bottle. Then you have the Charmat method, which is very famous for Prosecco, which involves pressurized tanks. You do a secondary fermentation in the tank, and then again filtered under pressure, bottled under pressure into another bottle. So that is the one way. And then you have smaller approaches, which is Méthode Ancestrale and Méthode Rurale, which we don't have to go into today. And the exercise today is really about the secondary fermentation, which is also known as champagne, Cap Classique, Crémant, Méthode Traditionnelle, Méthode Classico, Pas and Sec. These names and sort of references to the method is all related to the secondary fermentation. So, I've opted just to keep it in a sort of a South African context, because I think Cap Classique does speak for it. So those of you who don't know, there it's all in a nutshell. And please keep in mind that this presentation will be available via Cathy once we have done the presentation. So it means it's a classic traditional fermentation in the bottle, and which is pretty much developed over the years from champagne. The first Cap Classique was produced by Simonsig. It's a family operation in Stellenbosch in 1971. So Cap Classique in South Africa next year will only be 50 years old. So we are a fairly young category in the wine business in South Africa. We've developed a producers association to be sort of a platform for members that we, can be recognized in the industry. This was done in May 1992 with only 14 producers then. Today there's well over 250 producers, and the association has 102 members. Now, it doesn't sound like we speak to everyone, but we do, the members produces approximately 90% of the total Cap Classique. So we're fairly inclusive as an association. It also represents 28 geographical areas. There's about 320 SKUs, different Cup Classiques in the market. And sort of the local split between local sales is 80% and export is 20%. As members, we produce 9.5 million bottles, and the total production, according to our statistics, is just over 10 million bottles. We have a website that you also can gain additional information. The current legislation for Cup Classique, in terms of least contact and others, is the wine that's fermented in the bottle, that same bottle has to go to market, which supports the category of bottle fermented. Minimum 3 bars of pressure, which is an international ruling, and the minimum least contact time currently of 9 months. From the 2021 vintage, the minimum yeast contact time will move to 12 months. And maybe we can discuss that a little bit later, but I think it will come out when we talk about the secondary fermentation. We constantly strive, obviously, to improve standards. We have an annual peer review where we all get together as members and we taste each other's annual base wines, and we give positive and constructive criticism to make sure that we increase the category or the quality of the category. And just for instance, at Graham Beck, our non-vintage range is a minimum of 15 months on the lease, our vintage range 4 years, and our prestige 5 years minimum. Further at a glance in South Africa, again, I did mention 28 geographical areas. I'll show you a little bit of them just now. We recommend Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, obviously Pinot Meunier as well, which is sort of the classic Champenois grapes. But other varieties such as Pinot and Cabernet Franc, Shiraz do find their way into various blends of Cup Classique. We encourage the use of reserve wine for consistency and complexity. We do support and appreciate grape selection in the vineyard, so it's all hand-picked. There's no machine harvested grapes that go into Cup Classique. And the whole bunch principle, which we'll explain in detail, we will do that. And most members also work on juice separation, separating quality fractions from the press fractions. Those of you interested, this is the 20% that goes out into the international markets. The UK is the biggest supporter of Cup Classique currently. It's got a beautiful growth since 2018 to 2019 of 36%. USA is taking a slight knock, but the sort of overall view is that we have a sort of a steady market of just under 2 million bottles leaving the South African shores. Right, so we will discuss the vineyard aspects, obviously a little bit on the climate of our situations in the Cape. South Africa obviously is on this, the Western Cape is situated on the southern tip of Africa, as you can see on the map over there. This is the Western Cape, and the map shows you the dimensions. In South Africa, the Western Cape is divided into regional variation with sub-regions. And within each of those, there is some wards. To explain that, you'll see on the map. This is actually a little bit more where you can see all the different appellations. This is a little bit more like VAs that you would find in California. And for instance, Stellenbosch, which is seen as one little sub-region, actually has 6 different appellations, and our reference is wards. And as you can see listed at the moment, there is 53 different wards. And Cup Classique overall comes from 28 of these different wards. Then I see you do talk about cool climate versus warmer climates. So this is a very interesting map. This is a map taken for mean temperatures during the height of February. February has seen the peak of the summer months in the Western Cape. And you can see what this is trying to show is to try and show you that in all areas where grapes are grown, there is actually very cool areas. I think verticulturally, we understand that in South Africa that we embrace sunshine. It's just how we manage it in the vineyards. It's most probably more important. And then obviously various locations. If we go up the west coast, by the way, this is the Atlantic Ocean passing on the west side of the Southern Cape, the Western Cape. And then the bottom area over here, if you can see my cursor, this is the Indian Ocean with the southern tip of Africa there. Now, all these red spots you can see all there, these are considered to have an average mean temperature of 17 to 19 degrees in the height of summer. So it's fairly cool. And you can see Elgin, which is a plateau, is also considered cool climate. There's quite a few spots. But even in warm areas such as Robertson, where Graham Beck lies, we're actually on a continental shelf, which is a rain shadow mountain on the northern section. We have the southern one here. But even in the area, we can have cool climate conditions. So it's a little bit of a wake up as we're all starting to understand climate change, that everything is changing. They even have a great opportunity to produce some great bubblies out of UK. And I even read a little article that Sweden is boasting that they're going to be the next Europe or best in Europe. So, that's food for thought. But just again, these are the little areas. That is the western area now, or Darling, which is on the close proximity to the Atlantic Ocean. Atlantic is much cooler. It's most probably a 5-6 degree difference between temperatures from the ocean from this side to more the Indian Ocean, which is slightly warmer.
Pieter,
these just gives a little bit of a break. So let's go to the production.
Can I just ask, sorry, Pieter, can you hear me?
Yes.
Just go back to that slide again. So a lot of those little red bits, it's the red bits that we're looking at here that are suitable temperatures, aren't they? Yeah. A lot of these are in the areas that you would expect. So up in Darling and Groenkloof, and then down in sort of Walker Bay and those cooler areas by the sea. But we don't see an awful lot of MCCs traditionally coming from those areas. Is that because we haven't always planted the right grapes there? Is that, are people now changing the plantings of the grapes, or why do you think that is?
That's a good question. Darling is a fairly young appellation, and virtually every year or, every 6 months, some new little ward has been established or demarcated. So it is growing, but I think, if you look at the core of Classique producers, they are established family operations or something that has been in other geographical areas. And make no mistake, we definitely know as Classique producers that, we know exactly what Robertson region will give us in terms of flavor profiles. But if you want to encourage and broaden your dimension of flavors for blending opportunities, it is really vital to source grapes from Darling, source grapes from Elgin, even down towards the Southern Cape over here, Walker Bay, and areas like that. So it's just, according to, we have about 30 new producers joining in Classique, so it's gaining popularity. But so it's not that there's not Chardonnay or Pinot Noir grown there. It's just we as winemakers have the understanding that other geographical areas definitely gives you a broader sense of making sure you go for consistency, continuity in style.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that answers your question.
But we can probably expect to see more producers coming from those areas in the future, you think?
Well, I think so.
Or just more people
That,
using the grapes?
well, yeah, that's if we don't buy all the grapes up, you know, because everybody's shopping basket seems to be in the same areas, you know, and if you're a respected producer, other winemakers have their sights on you, you know, so we do see people following us with binoculars, you know, when we go into various
Tracking you out. Okay, fair enough. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to go into the production and the process. Just a schematic drawing just to explain the whole bunch principle. The whole cluster will go into a press. You have to, we'll go into detail of that. You have a settling period. You then have fermentation. You then have the blending, stabilization. You then have the tirage bottling, where we go on to the secondary fermentation. You have a secondary fermentation, time on the lees. Then you go through your riddling, either mechanically or hand done. You get the yeast down to the neck of the bottle. We then go through the disgorgement, which is freezing the neck, removing the sediment, adding the dosage, which we will also go into detail. Finally, corked and wire, a little resting period before we get to a labeling and for enjoyment for the customer out there. So that in short is the process. We do pride ourselves that all of our grapes is hand-picked in the vineyard, so we make sure that only the purest and the best possible whole bunch is selected. That is then hand-picked. We pick into little lug boxes, and because around 70% of all our grapes are within 10 minutes of process, we transfer those lug boxes into sort of a 300 kilo bulk bin, because, you know, by sheer volume that we have to get through on a day at Graham Beck, the bulk bin works perfectly, and I'll show you how we handle the bulk bins. You have Chardonnay at the bottom left, and you have some beautiful Pinot Noir at the, again, looking at varieties, as I did mention, we encourage as an association to talk about Chardonnay and Pinot Noir because we know what contributions those grapes can give us in a final blend. But there's nothing restricting people to use Chenin or Pinotage or anything else. So once these grapes are in process, this is just some slides of this year's vintage at Graham Beck. The bulk bin is then slowly turned onto an incline conveyor, so it's a hopper. And you can see the bins contains no, because the grapes are virtually within 10 minutes in the process, and the transport or the distance, there's no real time for the bunches to press on each other. The bunches go up on the incline conveyor, and then with conveyors running above our presses, we have various doors that can open to fill a press. So we have two of these sections. There you can see another just a little bit of a different angle where these gates open and we fill a press. So it's pretty much a whole bunch that end up in this. The smaller it is, traditionally there was the basket press, which obviously it's on the same philosophy. You fill it, it's then squeezed, and then you have to do a retrousse, which is sort of breaking it up. But having pneumatic press now, once we've gone through one cycle of pressing, we deflate. We do have one revolution before we start the second pressing cycle. So we'll go into that as well.
Can I just back you up a little bit? Why is whole bunch so important? What is it that whole bunch does for you that having destemmed berries wouldn't do? Why do you do whole bunch?
I I think the next slide will explain exactly what it is. So I'll just stay on that slide.
Okay.
Whole bunch means that the whole cluster goes into the press. Why we do that is that we want to regulate the amount of juice and where the juice is running from a berry. So that is a berry that we gently squeeze. You can see it's Pinot Noir. And actually, if you do it very gently, there is no color. So if you had to split that berry prior to it going into the press, you immediately have an enzymatic reaction where the color is drawn from the skin, and that same droplet will be pink. But we would rather regulate that. And it also gives us an opportunity to separate the purest juice. Now, those of you know, the more you press, the more phenolics you get, the more fleshiness you will get. But we can regulate how much of that we see as quality fraction and how much of that we see as press fraction.
Does there's concerns about oxidation? Is that also involved with why you do whole bunch? Because you want to make sure that there's less exposure to oxygen as it goes along?
Well, whole bunch handling definitely has its advantage that it has a slower oxygen pickup because you have not exposed the berry or split the berry where, you know, immediately you have so much more oxygen around. So it's a cluster. And if you look at a whole cluster, you know, you actually have to really squeeze it to get the juice out of it. So I think, you know, whole cluster definitely gives you less oxidation.
Okay.
It won't give you no oxidation because the juice will actually fall from the air or from the press through airspace. And obviously there you have a little bit of possibility of an oxidation. But a lot of winemakers prefer a little bit of oxidation prior to the fermentation because it helps to settle out some phenolics. You know, to gently work. It's not that we work sulfur-free. I think we'll touch on that just.
Okay. So, but mainly we're looking at so being able to control the color, as it were, and then also control the other sort of phenolics, any tannins or anything like that, and preserving the best juice and keeping it separate. Those are your overriding concerns why you do whole bunch, yeah?
Oh, absolutely. And you will be surprised that if you, you know, we pride ourselves because I think this is one of the most important steps in the process of bottle fermentation is how you handle the grape leaving the vine until it's in juice form.
Right.
There's many winemakers listening, and our language further on the process is sort of universal. It's the same story. Perfect. But how you can work the grape from picking to when it's in juice, this is where it's crucial. So you know, we will press, and that would give you a great idea of how gentle it is. This is a bunch of Chardonnay prior, so that's the whole bunch. You can see Chardonnay is a very nice tight bunch, and then once it's had its time in the press, you can see the stalk is still very much intact, and you know it hasn't really been touched, but all the juice is done, and that separation you know will happen depending on the flavor. So Pieter or myself will be at the juice trays and we'll taste the juice to make sure we cut at the right time, or alternatively, if you really a sticker for analysis, you can actually, as you press and more pressure is applied, the pH of the juice will shift. So depending on where you want the pH of your quality juice to your press juice, you can also split by following the pH during pressing.
What kind of pressing are you using? Oh, okay. Sorry, no, you're going on to pressing.
No,
okay.
We you know you know traditionally champagne was always a basket press. It was either a square or a round shape, which took 4,000 kilos of grapes. But even this has changed. It was known as the cockart press, and the sort of modern cockart press is now a horizontal, and it's got a plate from the one side that pushes it against you know a sieve. and that is how they recover it. Otherwise, you use a pneumatic press. A pneumatic has got a bladder inside, and with compressed air, the air will be blown in between the tank of the press and the bag. The bag will inflate and it will press the juice against some juice channels, and that juice will then immediately run off as into your juice selections. This is a classic example of Chardonnay pressing. We all talk about the champagne pressing cycles. Important thing here is to look at the pressures. You will see there's a light gray cycle, nearly 3 of them, but it's all related to the maximum amount of pressure that we use. So it is not like for still wine where you will press for a certain period, hold it there, and then deflate to break up the cake. In the champagne pressing cycle, you press for a certain period at 0.2 bars of pressure. You then increase the pressure to 0.4. You hold it for a certain time. This is the T, it means for holding time. And then you go to 0.6 and then 0.8. Once you've reached 0.8, let's call this first cycle to be 45 minutes. The press will deflate, or the bag will deflate, and you will do 1 revolution. This is just to make sure that the pressed grapes is now replaced by sort of the ones on the inside, and then the whole cycle will start again, and you'll repeat this. And sort of this is the dividing line where normally you have reached your peak of quality fraction. So this is cuvee fraction, which is also known as quality fraction. And then higher pressure will be applied over time now, because we're now closer to 2 hours if we get into this area, where we will then keep this portion as fresh fraction. And normally your total liters per ton of grapes is covered in sort of the 4th or 5th pressing cycle. But that's the importance. So for Chardonnay, Chardonnay is a much tighter bunch, as you saw the picture just now. And you have, you have to apply a little bit more pressure. The general rule is normally every, winemakers will intend to just choose a program and stick to it through the vintage, but we prefer to analyze each of our blocks and see how the juice is running, and we can manipulate the timeline and obviously the amount of pressure. Look at the variation. Yeah.
A question for you there, Pieter. Just coming in from Rob Gower from who makes wines in Elgin. Do inert gas presses allow you to increase your cuvee fraction? So can the kind of press that you use, can it increase the quality juice that you can actually produce?
Yeah, inert gas is quite an interesting, it's fairly new. I would say it's most probably, I think the first inert gas presses were developed about 10 years ago. This is allowing nitrogen, or you can use CO2 to, when the bag deflates or is pushing air in, that airspace is taken up by nitrogen or CO2. But as a style where we don't want to work with too reductive, we prefer a little bit of phenolics to oxidize out. That doesn't really bother us. So, I think it's most probably more about how long you're pressing that inert gas can assist, but invariably it has been proven that inert gas is much more for riper grapes, where you've got opportunity of oxidation to color and things like that. So I think it's more related to still wine.
Okay, cool. All right. And so each one of those cycles, then each one of these sort of little step things, that's about 45 minutes normally, yeah?
Yeah, let's call that about 45 minutes. So you can sort of see that, a guy who tells me that he recovers his juice in an hour and a half, well, he's making Coca-Cola.
Okay.
here again, it's all about the attention to detail and, you know, the obvious to separate. So you can see on Pinot Noir, we only, you know, instead of going to 1.4 bars of pressure, we never really reach 0.8 bars of pressure in our cycles. And this is what we have developed. As we see, Pinot Noir is a much softer skin grape. And obviously the recovery of the juice and the free run is so much easier. So, you know, where we would go up to 0.8 for Chardonnay, we get to 0.5 on the first stage of Pinot Noir, and it works perfectly. And you'll see in the next slides how the color of the juice even changes. So I'll show you that.
So just recapping then, so what you're saying here is that because Chardonnay is a much tighter bunch, because it's a more compact bunch, you have to squeeze a little bit harder to get that juice out. But Pinot Noir, because it's slightly less compact, because it has a thinner skin, but also presumably because you're not wanting that colour most of the time on your Pinot Noir as well, then you do it much sort of softer when you're actually pressing it. Does each cycle for Pinot Noir, does that take longer than 45 minutes?
No, it's slightly less because remember you know
so hard.
you're also racing against time, and you know the longer the skins remain in contact with itself, you know, you can develop color. So with Pinot Noir, we actually have about a 40-minute, well, let's call it a half an hour. We got a half an hour turnaround quicker than that to Chardonnay. Right. So Chardonnay presses longer to get to your liters, but Pinot Noir, you can, instead of a 3-hour 10, 3-hour 15-minute, you can get to fully pressing of Pinot Noir 2 hours 45 minutes.
Okay, perfect. And how full are your presses? How many grapes do you press at a time? What weight?
Oh man, we squeeze it in like a sausage. No, I'm only joking. No, we appreciate the principle of the Champagne philosophy of 4 tons to give you your recoveries. So our presses is 8-ton presses. So our Pera presses that we have in series can take 8 tons of grapes. And we have smaller presses also that can take the sort of traditional 4 tons of grapes. So we don't overfill it. We fill it obviously to be economical time-wise. So 8 tons works perfectly. 8 tons, we know the turnaround for Chardonnay is 3.5 hours. And on Pinot Noir, it's 2 hours, 45 minutes.
Okay.
And this is interesting. This is just the reason why we separate quality fraction from press fraction. You have a much more pristine, crystal clear juice. That juice can virtually go to fermentation. It's so clean. And then, you know, the longer you press, obviously you're getting a little bit more phenolics and maybe a little bit of flavor profile, but at least we've got it separate. So we will collect all our press fractions from Chardonnay, providing it's coming from the same origin, into one component, and obviously all our press fraction, quality fractions from our various blocks will kept separately for vinification.
So when you start sort of looking at your blending, how from one batch of grapes, you are then going to make sort of 3 or 4 different sets of wine coming from that one batch? Is that
right? I would have loved to have sort of 3 different batches, but purely for our size and the setup that we've got, we make sure that we do have 2 different fractions.
Okay, so it's the 2 main.
You know, the interesting thing is why Champagne has got minimum 3 fractions is that the producer, a Champagne producer, actually has to supply 50 liters of every pressing. Every ton of grapes they produce has to go to centralized alcohol distillation. So what they normally do is they take the first 50 liters because, you know, their crates, it's very rainy by the end of their harvest season. There's a lot of sort of dirt and mud on these lug boxes. And obviously with the sand and stuff falling into the presses, that first 50 liters is sort of classified as rebeche, which they will then go to distillation, and then they start doing their cuvee fraction and then the sort of two tie fractions, if you understand what I'm saying. I'm sure people have read about that.
Okay, cool.
And that is Pinot Noir. Again, you have virtually no color from the very early free run juices, and obviously the longer it stays in the press, the more color you get. And it's only not about pressure, it's also about holding time in the press. But again, we can separate. We must probably keep the first two glasses on the left as one fraction, and we will combine the other two as a separate fraction. Okay. Now, when we get to the base wines and we talk about color, I can explain. You can remove color as well if you don't want it, but we'll get to that now. So we go into the settling. Depending on the temperature of the grapes, we normally cool our grapes or the juice as it runs from the press, just to make sure we can control the settling. We normally talk about cold settling. This is just to create a very clean juice fermentation. And yeah, you can see a classic example. If you had to put your fingers on the other side of the glass, you can see them very clearly. That's sort of the guidance that we have. For those who go into a little bit more detail, it's also known that sort of cloudiness is known as NTUs. It's measured as the amount of turbidity in the wine. But we have found that, we don't want to be super clean, but we also don't want to be dirty. We use pectolytic enzymes for the settling period, and obviously quality juice settles overnight. And the combined press fractions, we follow the new principle of flotation. I hope you can see the cylinder on here. It is just using a vegetative derivative from either peas or potato that we will add to the press fraction. We will generate or pump some nitrogen through it. And you can see within virtually 40 minutes to an hour, you have wine completely crystal clear that can go into fermentation. So again, that seems for a few people too clear, but remember we've got the light lees from our quality that we can always add to there just to make sure that we have the right turbidity prior to fermentation.
And do you use enzymes for both Chardonnay and for Pinot Noir as well?
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Beautiful.
Right. So, yeah. And then these wines will be racked normally from a side glass, side valve. And then obviously we will regulate when we get onto the final lees of the settling, we will regulate how much of that we want to draw into the fermentation. And then that very last bit of lees is again collected because, again, our aim is from 1 ton of grapes to have 650 liters going into primary fermentation.
Okay.
So base wine fermentations, this is sort of an international language, but, a lot of stainless steel is used. And we know that a lot of portions, especially Chardonnays, will go through a little bit of barrel fermentation, but it all depends stylistically what you want to achieve. We do know that you have brightness and preciseness in stainless steel because they are temperature controlled. Normally, the sort of average fermentation temperatures is anything between 12 and 18 degrees. And that obviously in barrel fermentation is around 20, 21 degrees, depending on your thing. And we find that barrels definitely the texture and sort of creamy, aromatic, that definitely can be very, be a great advantage to blending it in with some stainless steel. There's different mallow styles. You either not do non-mallow or you do malolactic styles, but that's the choice of the winemaker as it depends on the final style that you want to achieve. And also in a warmer climate, and we're seeing it in great years, in 2018 vintage in the UK, people were starting to talk of adding a 0.5 gram or 1 gram of acidity because they felt they needed it, or and obviously not do malolactic.
Peter, can I just interrupt half a second? Pierre just wants to chip in something about enzymes. So Pierre, you're live, off you go. Tell us about what you wanted to say about enzymes.
Yeah, sorry about that, Peter. I tried to chip in, but I didn't realize I was muted again. So we can go back to that slide with the flotation. Something I'd like to mention, which is quite critical, is doing the pectolytic test. To see whether you are pectin stable or unstable. A lot of people add the enzymes to their tank and think 2 hours later the enzyme must have done its work by this stage, and they start the flotation, and 2 hours later they phone around in a panic because half of the lees has gone to the top and the other half has broken down to the bottom of the tank again, and they can't get any clear juice out. So it's imperative that you do the pectin test, which is a very simple test, and to make sure that you use the right amount of pectolytic enzymes, and as well as checking your temperatures on your juice, because if the temperature of the juice is too low, the enzyme doesn't work at all. So those are very critical parameters when it comes to the enzymatic workings for settling and for flotation.
Okay, cool. All right. I'm going to mute you again if you make it noisy.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's absolutely right. You know, the detail there is, you know, if it's not pectolytic stable, you can forget about flotation. But flotation is a huge advantage. It's a great tool for a winemaker, and those who haven't tried it should consider that going forward. Then obviously we did touch on reserve wines, but that most probably is more about the sort of final blending. But we do see that the sort of general philosophies in Classique, it's, you know, some people don't use or don't have reserve wine, but those who do would use up to 30% of reserve wines, depending on the style, and obviously depending on what the year is also given you.
So Pieter, can I just ask then about this base wine fermentation? What are you looking for from that base wine fermentation? Are you looking for speed, to get it over, to get it through as quickly as possible so it stays nice and clear and neutral? Are you trying to develop flavors? Does that affect the choice of yeast that you use, or what's your thinking when you're doing the base wine fermentation?
Yeah. We don't chase esters or glycerine or, you know, that type of thing where, you know, you want to try and produce so much aromatics. Keeping in mind that the ripeness levels that we pick Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, you know, they have very fragile fruit flavors. So, you know, we don't want to bombard them because those esters or thiols will never last. So we try and use, it's not really neutral, but it's obviously very specific yeast. It all originates from Champagne. Mm-hmm. We actually have local sort of cousin called N96 out of South Africa. So we try and really stay clear from trying to develop something that's not going to last a time. So we're looking at a clean fermentation, perfectly, you know, that we never sort of ferment more than 2 barrels a day. So, you know, during the base wine fermentations, the sugar and the density of the sugar in the wine is measured in the mornings and in the evenings. And we can regulate the fermentation, obviously, by the cooling on the tanks. And we're looking at a fermentation to be completed between 12 and 18 days. So it's a 12 and 18 days. Okay. It's a normal fermentation. And then what you will see once the fermentation's done, we then start immediately selecting some components that we can use to top up all our quality tanks. it's important that once the fermentation's done, that we fill those tanks to the brim, and then we allow sort of natural sedimentation of the lees and the yeast to go down to the bottom of the tank with some assisted cooling. So where the fermentation temperature would have been 14 to 16 degrees, after fermentation and the tank is topped, we will then bring on the temperature to around 10 degrees.
And one more question, sorry, what levels of alcohol are you at the end of this base wine fermentation?
Well, obviously our challenge in South Africa is chasing the sun. You know, we're not chasing ripe. So that's the big difference, you know, from sort of northern hemisphere climates to southern hemisphere climates, is that we really chase the sun. So our window period for getting the optimum alcohol levels between 9.6 to 11, it's really a race against time. So we would have base wines from 9.5 volume% alcohol. This is all natural. To about 11.5 degrees. So that's sort of our parameter.
Okay, perfect. Cool.
And then you can see in front of there this great slide, which is one that we did yesterday, or actually we've been tasting this whole week. After lockdown, we've been allowed to get closer to our bees. And yeah, you can see the beautiful selections from Chardonnay and the Pinot Noirs. And take note of the colors. You can see there is some Pinot Noirs that virtually is completely see-through. And there's the odd one here and there that's got a little bit of color. Now, a lot of people at this stage will remove the color either prior to fermentation or after fermentation by adding charcoal. Can you believe it? You know,
what
charcoal.
What does charcoal do?
Well, charcoal is a stripper of note. You know, it does it first takes color, but with that goes all your precursors of beautiful aromatics that you need for the secondary fermentation. Yeah. So we have learned over the years at Graham Beck that, you know, obviously charcoal is completely forbidden. You know, we don't have it. And we will, wherever we get a little bit of color, is a great foundation for rosé. Because a lot of people will make a blend, and we'll get to the various styles just now. They'll make a white blend, and then they will take 2 or 3 or 4% red wine and call it rosé. It's one way of getting there. And also we don't have the opportunity to do sort of the bleeding off, you know, a saignée type of thing where you have Pinot Noir on the skins for a few couple of days, draw sufficient color, and then do the pressing. So we do naturally rely on the color from Pinot Noir to come from other geographical areas where grapes take up to 6 hours to get to process. And during that time, we have natural buildup of color. I hope that sort of makes sense.
Cool.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll be using all these components, and, you know, it's all about selection. It's really important to keep in mind, you know, what style of bottle fermentation or Classique you want to produce. And then obviously the selection process would take up to about 2 months, tasting, reselection to make sure that, you know, we do that. Normally in the business, the marketeer talks about a brand pyramid, and it looks like the Egyptian pyramids. It's one with a pinnacle at the top. For us, our pyramid is an upside down one. We will give all these components equal chance to be the cherry of the day or the cherry for a specific style, and then that's how we do our selection.
So is it every year it's a whole new sort of thing and you're just doing it on taste? Or are you, I mean, you've obviously been at Graham Beck working with a lot of these same vineyards for a very long time. There must be some parcels that, you know, given all the, you know, the given a good year, then you will get great fruit from this parcel over here, and this one over there is generally going to go into my top stuff, etc., etc. So is that all in your head? Do you ever write these things down, or do you literally go every year looking at it absolutely blind, show me what you've got?
No, I think we have to, maybe we didn't spend enough time vineyard-wise, and, you know, because there's a lot of things that we haven't touched on, clonal selections, soil types, the of your vineyard and things like that, the amount of sunlight hours you into the vineyard row. Just now we can talk about just the sort of research that we're doing, you know, where we have a vineyard row plant east-west, and we harvest the northern side versus the southern side, and you have two different, all on the same day, but you have two different wines after fermentation. Wow. And you can have a south row direction, you then harvest the morning side, the east side, and against the western side, and you will see it's two different wines. So a little bit on that a little bit later. But the importance about the viticultural side, it's become a precision viticulture, and you know, the use of weather stations and things like that, and NDVI, it's a new direction of how we sort of map each of our vineyard blocks by photography, which assists us in our selection. So just to answer it, it's a little bit long-winded, but each of our blocks that we work with has a potential where the wine will end up. It's not necessary to say it is the cherry this year, but it has the opportunity. So it comes in as a vintage Chardonnay component, but it might just be that it is even better than that, or it is one step down. So it's not a blind run. It's, you know, it's all purposely, and it's actually quite precise.
Okay.
But we have a clean slate every year. It's a little bit like a chalkboard. It's completely clean, and we have these opportunities to cherry pick. Perfect.
Cool.
So there you can see just a little bit closer, you know, that you know, the use of Chardonnays, the use of Pinot Noirs will definitely be quite something. And immediately, just by pinpointing those, if you do know the Graham Beck folio, you know, that tank 13, that tank 77, that one at the back will naturally be the base for our rosé non-vintage. This is a very interesting one. It's actually a co-ferment where we've, a co-pressing, where we would have had Chardonnay and Pinot Noir going into the same press, but we can chat about that later. And then obviously Chardonnays, depending on what you do. So all these wines will be tested, retasted till we get to the proper blends. During this time, this is obviously during fermentation, but once you've had the wines settled long enough, this is at least sort of three months later, we are pretty much ready to do our final selections. This is just again to show you the little bit of different colors. You can see the sort of light lees flavors, light lees sediments in the bottom of the bottles. Naturally would be rosé, maybe that one as well. This would be blended for our Brut, for instance. We have the opportunity to work with a perpetual reserve on our non-vintages, and then sort of selections. But that gives you an idea of how the base wines look prior to finishing them off as blends.
Okay, a couple of questions coming through now, Pieter. How important is clonal variation with different varieties? You're obviously keeping all these different clones that you've got sort of separately all the way through, or yeah, what's your sort of take on clones?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it is definitely something that you have to keep in mind. On Chardonnay at Graham Beck, we have 6 different clones, and currently we have 5 different clones of Pinot Noir.
Okay.
And the only way to really explain, because it's a little bit like apples and apples, you know, some people hardly sort of see the difference, but the only way to teach yourself and learn a little bit more about the influence of a clone on a variety is to sort of ferment them separately. So what we would do, if this was 3 different clones of Chardonnay, let's call that 548, 277, and clone 96, we would actually take from the tank, we will hand bottle about 30 bottles each of the different clones. And then after fermentation, because the bubble amplifies and makes it much more apparent, easier to understand. And then we're starting to see, wow, this one is giving us a little bit more of a chalky aromatic. This one is giving us a little bit more yellow fruit. And this is, well, this is exactly, it's got the pristine, bright, precise acidity. And that you can only learn by keeping them separate. To put them into one pot, then I think you're defeating the object of following the clones. Likewise with Pinot Noir, there is known the PN52, which is the old PK5 clone, which has very little color. But the other clones of Pinot Noir, because Pinot Noir was really brought into the country to make red wine rather than Cap Classique, you have clones 115, 113, 777, and 667, and those will invariably have a little bit more color, and you know, obviously rightfully so. If you are going to do a selection, you must probably go to the red wine clone for your rosé base and use your PN52 for the white base.
Cool. Okay. How many tanks in total are you making selections from?
This year, I think Pieter can just confirm we have 132 different components this year.
Yeah, hold on. Sorry, let me just find you. If you're gone, unmute. Unmute.
Yeah, but
that's close enough, Pieter. It's 137 at the moment, but that obviously includes both tanks and barrel batches. So if we had to go each barrel as well, it increases dramatically.
That was a question from me as well. So looking at the picture on the screen now, that reserve portion, the reserve Chardonnay, is that colour because it has been kept in a barrel, or is it just because it's a year old or whatever it is?
That you actually see there is what we call a perpetual reserve. So that wine contains wine when we started Graham Beck. So that base wine there is 30 years old. So
wow. Okay.
The idea of using reserve is obviously, first of all, for continuity in your house style and to bring in consistency, or even to bring in a little bit more complexity if you've had a lean year. So that is, and the sort of detail has changed slightly. Part of the color was also oak driven, because when we have fermented our Chardonnay of this year in the barrel, you know, by the next 2 weeks, we will start taking that out. And then we will bring our perpetual reserve, which is in stainless steel at the moment, back in barrels to keep our barrels healthy. So it's a little bit of a play off to make sure that we keep our barrels healthy till the next year. So the color is definitely influenced by oak as well.
Wow. Okay, cool. All right.
Right. So then we go to the tirage bottling, which is considering that you've now made up your various different blends. It could be rosé, it could be a blanc de blanc, it could be a white blend, it could be a blanc de noir. Depends on what you have, even a prestige cuvée. You will then obviously prepare that finished base wine by adding sugar and preparing a specific strain of yeast. These yeasts will come from Champagne, which will then do the fermentation. So if you want a little bit more detail on that, we can just place your questions, but you can see the wines actually cloud when it goes into the bottle. which means it's your base wine with 24 grams per liter of sugar and your 4% yeast inoculum. The bottle is closed with a temporary cap. It's a crown cap that seals off the wine for the secondary fermentation. And then the bottles would go into the darkest and coolest parts in the cellar for the fermentation and yeast contact time.
Okay, Angela is just saying, so again, the reserve wines, it's all one tank, okay? And you top it up every year, is that right? So it's sort of like a Solera tank, if you like.
It's a modern take on the Solera, you know, where it's not that we have 3 different ages, it's one complete one. And if we take, let's just say, if we take 10,000 liters of that into our non-vintage, we will take the new non-vintage blend and bring that volume back into the reserve. So our reserve will always maintain to be a stock holding of 10% of what we need for our non-vintages. So it's like a modern Solera. Whatever we use is retopped with fresh wine of the year.
Okay, and what would be your average? Would it be about 10%? Would it be more than that? What? We're not a brand that has a massive vintage variation, are we? Not like champagne. No,
but it's there for the consistency and the continuity of style. The consumer's palate is well trained. We have to keep in mind that I think brand loyalty still remains sparkling wine all over the world. Absolutely. And it's important to keep that golden thread running through. So at Graham Beck, it could be as little as 4% and could be as much as 10%. It depends on the final makeup of this year's wine.
Perfect. Okay.
And then there you can see bottles lie horizontal. The reason why the bottles lie horizontal is to allow, once the yeast is done its work, to be spread over with a thin layer throughout the bottles, and I'll show you what I mean with that. Well, that's just for the show, but there you can see, you can't really see that, but there you can see a classic one, you know. So the bottle lies horizontal, so you can see the wine is exposed. You have a thin layer of lees running through the whole bottle. And this is where the magic happens. This is where the autolysis starts. We know the secondary fermentation takes about 6 to 8 weeks to complete. And during that stage, we gain another 1 to 1.2% alcohol, and we develop 6 bars of pressure, 6 atmospheres of pressure in the bottle. Mm-hmm. But then it remains on that thin layer of lees to develop what you want as a final result. The longer we can keep it on the lees, we now know it's proven all over the world. Even in South Africa, we have done some research that we know the organoleptical aromatics definitely improves over time. So the longer the wine can stay on the lees, the better for the final product. So in South Africa currently, it has to remain on the sediment for 9 months. And by next year, the 2021, it will move to 12 months, which is a huge step in the right direction for quality perception of Classique in South Africa. So it remains on that lees for it could be up to 5-6 years, depending on what the final results should be.
What's the temperature, Pieter? So
I want to just spend. Sorry about that.
Well, what temperature are you keeping it at for the second fermentation? Because I've got a question here from Laurie, quoting Didier Despont from Champagne Salon and de la Motte, saying that he believes that in order to get the bubbles correct, you should do your second fermentation at 9 degrees centigrade. And Laurie's question is, how does that really happen when most yeasts have got a cold tolerance of 10 degrees? What temperature do you have your second fermentation at?
Well, we are in Africa, you know.
Yeah.
We don't have chalk avenues, you know, which I love the Salon and de la Motte cellars. They've got deep, dark chalky soils, and you actually, you have to, it's anything between 8 and 10 degrees in 30 feet under the ground or whatever. So we have to rely on expensive electricity to keep it running. So our ambient temperature for the secondary fermentation happens in winter, it comes down to 12 degrees, and in summer it will be a maximum of 15 degrees. Now, if you consider that we have a very good possibility in summer that we run to about 40, 42 degrees outside, I think we are doing a pretty good job keeping the wine cool as possible. Keeping in mind where we store our wines, you saw that one slide with a bottles. If you've got a mass of cold energy, glass is a very weak conductor of heat or cold. So if you've got 12 degrees there, you need virtually a month of variation for that wine to start moving temperature. So I think we're okay with that, but it is true. And the cooler the slower you can ferment in your secondary fermentation, the better bubble retention you will have. So that question is completely right, yes.
Cool. Okay. So
right.
onto your picture, because I think that's going to answer Nicolas' question, hopefully.
I would just really, it looks complicated, but if you can see the Pinot Meunier, which is one of the grapes, and I'm just using the Champagne because so much research has been done on these three varieties. If you follow the maturation curve of Pinot Noir on its own, Pinot Meunier, you can see the evolution of yeast. If this is the intensity over time at the bottom, you will have a peak of just over 2 years. Then Pinot Meunier has done its job. Pinot Noir is a slower starter, and it must probably evolve between 4 and 5 years if you had Pinot Noir as 100% in the bottle. And likewise for Chardonnay, if you had Chardonnay, at least 7 to 8 years before you get the peak in the sort of autolysis. Now, depending on how you construct your blends, if you can understand that you are going to use more red than white, you are slowly but surely optimizing your time on the lees. So your evolution will be slightly quicker. So Blanc de Blanc, if we all speak Blanc de Blanc and we look at the intrinsics of Blanc de Blanc, anything below 6 years, really, you are still far away from getting to optimum autolysis. So I hope this makes sense, but it's really interesting that if you consider Champagne to be 2/3 red with a little bit of white, you have most non-vintage Champagnes going to market after 3 years, and you can sort of understand that it will have a little bit more Meunier to Pinot Noir, and then a little bit less Chardonnay in the blend. So I hope that explains. That gives you a very good guidance of the effect of varietals in least contact time for the yeast autolysis.
How quickly would you actually get that yeast autolysis flavour in the wine? So Nicolas saying in Champagne, 15 months on the lees. How soon do you think that you can actually pick up those flavours? And is this presumably why you think it's so important that we extend our lees time so that we get more flavour in the wines?
Well, originally Champagne was also 9 months, but we're going back maybe 15 years ago. And then they did change it to 15 months yeast contact time. But the technicality of a non-vintage Champagne, it can be 15 months on the lees, but it can only be sold when it's 30 months old. So you can disgorge after 15 months, keep it 15 months on the cork, and then go to the market, or like most Champagne houses will keep it for virtually it's 3 years on the lees and then go to market, obviously after riddling and disgorging. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question.
I think he's asking, I mean, at what point sort of, I mean, I've tasted things that have been 9 months on the lees,
yes, the lees,
and there is a difference, isn't there, in flavour? When does it really start kicking in that you get this autolytic character?
Very interesting. You know, that we went to the Classique Association some years ago. Went to Savas, who's our wine and spirits, who's the ruling and regulation body on these things. We said we as winemakers believe we need minimum 12 or 15 months on the lease. They says that sounds fine, but how do you prove it? So we got funding. And WineTech did a study where we took 7 Classique producers' wines, and we followed it. A guy called Dr. Neil Jolly at the ARC in Stellenbosch did the study for us. And yeah, it was not rocket science. The difference between 9 and 12 is quite dramatic. So
Sure.
Maybe from 12 to 15, not so much, but from 15 to 24, again, you've got another jump. So if we had to sort of rearrange this graph, most probably you can sort of see the same thing. Over time, you get much more complexity, you're getting intensity. So that is where it is. So that is why we're happy to say, let's move from 9 to 12. And who knows, most probably will also end at 15 months down the line, but it will take time, yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, cool.
Okay, then once we've had our sufficient lease contact times and things like that, we need to get to sort of the disgorgement stage. Obviously, there is riddling involved. You either do it in Pieter or then the Giro Palette. Which is the mechanical machine. A Pieter hand thing, invariably you can sort of turn once a day, so the process is prolonged. You know, you most probably will be able to turn clean between 4 and 6 weeks by hand, where a machine can do it in 1 week for you. You know, COVID has got nothing to do on machines. They work through the time, they work on weekends, they don't lunch, they don't that type of thing. But that's why it's so much quicker, because you, in the mechanical riddling, you riddle every 4 to 6 hours. It will go through a process. That's why it can be so much quicker. So it involves taking the bottle in a very horizontal position to an upside down upright position. And then we go through the neck freezer. So the bottles remain upside down, as you can see, it goes into a freezing solution. And invariably it freezes in 6 to 8 minutes, depending on the temperature of your cooling liquid. And then there is, there you can probably see quite clearly that you've got the wine frozen with the yeast as the darkness there, lying or frozen in the neck. And obviously having 6 atmospheres of pressure, if you go through the degorgeur and the dosage machine, that cap shoots out, that ice plug is removed, a little bit of wine goes into a wine reservoir for your dosage to go in, and we'll tackle the dosage now. And once the dosage is in, that same wine is just used to get your bottle to the same height prior to pressing, corking and wiring. So that's just a little bit of detail there. You can see the lees that has come out of the ice plug. And obviously we have a reference on all of our bottles to make sure we have traceability throughout the process.
And that's a disgorging tool, isn't it, that you got there in that picture? So obviously with the slightly, pretty much exactly like a bottle opener would work if we were opening a beer, but obviously you can't actually have your hand directly above the bottle because it's going to take your fingers off. So you need to have a little bit more length on that. Yeah,
you just can't see the handle, but it's like a funny little reverse bottle opener. It's that will take hold of the lip of the crown cap, and that will press on the crown cap. So it's really opening a beer in sort of reverse. It's known as à la volée. This is normally a technique that you will do when you are not freezing, but you're quite eager to look at the quality of your wine. So you would have riddled the bottle, the yeast would be upside down, and through a motion, which is known as à la volée, you will remove that cap, and that little bit of wine will push out the sediment, and we can taste the wine. So yeah, it's quite an art. Some guys have lost their jobs because they lose too much wine, but yeah, and some guys lose their jobs because they do it too late and the wine's cloudy again. So Pieter and I often have competitions to see who can do it the best.
Cool. Okay.
After corking and wiring, there's a very important part of sort of a resting period to ensure integration for the dosage, which we'll discuss now, and to sort of make sure that the wine is pretty balanced before the labeling exercise is done. So that is that. And then we will go through just before we take some questions. I saw in the framework of the things that there's a few things, so we will just touch on the styles of Classique. For me, it's quite clear that when we talk about styles, it's, you know, you're either talking of a blend, or you're talking of rosé, or you're talking of things. I would classify the Classique styles to be the following, you know, a non-vintage, which can contain more, if a blend contains more than 15 per years of older wine, you lose the opportunity of calling it a vintage. And for some people, a non-vintage is also the house style, you know, again, about consistency and continuity. More of a modern take on a non-vintage, people also talk of a multi-vintage. So if you do see a MV behind the style of wine, it just means it's from more than one vintage.
I've never seen that. Who's using that? Which countries?
There is one or two UK producers starting to use that. There is, I've seen some technical data of some Champenois guys using it as well. They talk about a multi-vintage. I think Krug, for instance, they don't talk about non-vintage, they talk about their multi-vintage, because it can contain anything up to 7 or 8 different years. So multi-vintage is quite a nice take. You know, I think the consumer still doesn't understand vintage versus non-vintage, but that we can discuss openly. Obviously, if you want to do a vintage, it must contain minimum 85%. I think it's sort of the international OIV ruling. But to us at Graham Beck, a vintage is 100% of the vintage. It's the expression of the best selections of parcels to make up the style of your vintage. And then there's Blanc de Blanc, which means white from white. I think you're all familiar with these names. Blanc de Noir means it's black from white, so you can only use red grapes. You can use more than one variety as long as it's red. And then rosé. Rosé's category is quite broad. And the color of rosé also goes from really like onion skin color to much darker reds. Then I would call, you know, if we talk about styles, because a lot of people also say, yes, but, you know, Brut Zero is also a style. You know, maybe Nectar or Demi-Sec is another style, but I think we mustn't confuse. These ones mentioned here, I see as styles, and then your sugar levels have different classifications. So it depends on how you read the label. The following one will tell you exactly what it's about. So the sweetness levels runs by these categories. You have the driest style that you can have is Brut Nature, also known as Brut Zero, which means it's 0 to 3 grams per liter of sugar. And then you have a classification called Extra Brut, which is, let's call it 3 to 6. You have a Brut classification 6 to 12. But these three also can be known as Brut. So if you want to make it more precise, then you use extra brut if it's below 6, and below 3 you can then obviously have the reference to brut nature, brut 0. Then you have the most craziest of all categories, and this is worldwide. It is international languages. You have a classification called extra dry. Now, extra dry in my mind sounds worse than brut, but it is 12 to 17 grams of sugar. Okay, this is the worlds where Prosecco is playing. They are making it dry and shipping it sweet. And then you have a classification called dry, or also known as sec, which is 17 to 32 grams. And you have demi-sec, which starts at 32 up to 50 grams. So I hope that makes it clear. So, you know, stylistically, I think you just, when you are talking about a brut nature, to me, it's not really a category, it's a category of sweetness, because brut nature could be a blanc de blanc, it could be a rosé, it could be anything, if you understand what I'm trying to
And just to make it clear, just going back, sort of just reminding people that obviously all the time that you're having the second fermentation, these are bone dry wines, aren't they? I mean, how much sugar would there be naturally before you started that second fermentation? Pretty much less than 1 gram in anything at all?
Well, yeah. Keep in mind that a wine after fermentation is never sugar-free. 3 different basic sugars in composition of a grape. It is glucose, fructose, and sucrose. Sucrose and glucose are fermentable, but fructose is really non-fermentable. So your residual sugar might be 1 gram, maybe 1.5 maximum as a still wine. So all the base wines, going back to the base wines, you will have a natural sugar of, let's call it 1. And that will influence the amount of sugar that you add for fermentation. So you will add between 20 and maximum 23 and 24 grams of sugar if your residual sugar is at 1.
Okay.
After the fermentation in the bottle, your wine is back to its 1 gram.
Yeah, and that's so, and that's why
providing providing you had a healthy secondary fermentation, and that all your sugar has fermented up. So you back at your 1 gram, and then at the stage of disgorgement, this is where you're adding sugar. So if you add in and you want to call your wine that had 1 gram of sugar, and you want to be a brut nature or brut 0, you can virtually, in all fairness, only add 2 grams of sugar, because your residual sugar will read 3.
Cool. So I think I'm just going back to WSET, sort of, you know, reminding the guys from level 3, it is a question that I do see get asked sometimes, you know, how do you make sweet sparkling wines? And either your options are to do an ASTI method, which means that you're going to stop it in the middle of fermentation, or the only other way to do it is to add this sugar back in. Okay, we can't actually have a second fermentation with sugar present that's not meant to be doing the fermentation. We're not trying to actually, we can't have a sweet wine second fermenting in the bottle, because clearly then you're not going to be able to control how much bubbles it's going to produce, are you? I mean, if there's sugar there, the yeast will presumably eat it, and then you're going to have exploding bottles.
Yeah, it's a little bit more like a close recipe. You have to really make sure, you know. Yeah. There is a little movement that you know, people are moving from 24 grams per liter down to 21 to 22 grams per liter. There's a classic one, for instance, like a Franciacorta has got a classification called Saturn, and Saturn means that the wine that goes to market has 1 bar less of pressure. So they only will go to 5 bars of pressure, and their wine, once it, after disgorging and goes into the market, Saturn only has around 4 bars of pressure. So it really depends. But to fall in an international standard of sparkling wine, it has 3 bars of pressure.
Cool. Okay. Fantastic. All right. Where are we going now? Okay.
That's where we are.
Where we are now.
I hope we've tackled the detail. Obviously, if there is questions and answers, I can.
Okay, I'm going to unmute some people because way back, Angela, I didn't forget you. Angela has a question about the bottle. So, Angela, I'm going to unmute you so that you can ask your question for Pieter rather than me relaying it. Okay, so Angela, off you go.
Hi, Pieter. The question I have is the colour of bottles. Are all your bubblies bottled in dark bottles? Because there is something called light strike, which is creating a lot of havoc, I believe.
Yeah, it's amazing. A lot of work actually has been done by Tom Stevenson regarding light strike, and light strike is awful and it's quite instantaneous, and because light strike is referred to a flint bottle, so it's a clear glass bottle, where the darker your color is, from light green to dark green to amber, you have much more protection against UV and obviously natural sunlight. And because most wines mature in very cool and sort of dark conditions, your light strike really happens at the point of disgorging, where you bring it to the exposure of light and obviously natural light. And there is a thing called DSM or DSDM. It's a sulfide binding that really tastes like, or smells like rotten socks, like a wet dog type of thing that can happen within the wine being exposed to natural light. So dark green is much better, but definitely if we look at the success of Classique port, which is actually in a black bottle will give you the most protection against light.
And Pieter, is it just then the smell, the character, it doesn't affect the bubble at all?
Well, it affects the bubble in a way, because the bubble is a great transfer medium. It makes it even look worse. I think it's far more apparent in sparkling wine than that to still wine, for instance. But yeah, it does. Well, the flavor is sort of attached to the bubble, so it's a little bit of a catch-22. It's once it's there, it cannot go away. Whether you shake out all the bubbles, it is still there. So yeah, light strike is a.
Okay, cool.
Okay, thanks, Pieter.
Thanks, Angela. Okay, I'm going to unmute Nicolas, who is a WSET APP in Paris. So he teaches WSET students in Paris. He's also an MW Stage 2 student. Just to say before he asks his question, so it's a question that anybody in here who is a WSET Level 3 student, this is a new term that you haven't heard of. Don't freak out, okay? It's an interesting thing, but don't worry that you haven't heard this term. So Nicolas, you're unmuted, off you go.
Hi everyone, sorry for WSET Level 3. I was just curious about the Maillard reaction, Pieter. Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Maillard reaction pretty much happens at the point where the dosage is in with the final wine. Now, Maillard means it's like a cooking action, so it's more of an integration where, remember, you have a wine that has not been exposed to sulfur for a hell of a long time. It has been sort of reductive stage, and your dosage that you're adding is a high concentration of sugar and protected with a little bit of SO2. So this SO2 sort of burns into it, and that sort of, in essence, is sort of known as the Maillard reaction. But there's a little bit more detail that one can find, to explain exactly. And this Maillard reaction is also quite instant. So, when Pieter and I do benchmark dosage trials, it's not like we have to wait to the next day or wait 2 weeks to see the change. It is immediate because of this interaction and so the inner cooking of the dosage into the wine itself. I hope that answers your question.
So yeah, so that's SO2 is a major player in that part.
Yeah, SO2, keep in mind that, you know, the SO2 levels in sparkling wine is far less than sort of natural and organic wines permitted, because if we were working with high levels of SO2, we would never have a secondary fermentation. So the concentration of your dosage, or the SO2 in the dosage, yes, it is in a high concentration, but you might only using 10 or maximum 15 milliliters, which will only equate to a free SO2 of 20 milligrams per liter. So it's small, but it is a big enough influence that it actually cooks during that stage. And there was a slide earlier on where we talked about the natural resting period for the wine of disgorging. Some people like to say it's 3 months, but I think 3 weeks is sufficient for that mail-out reaction to set.
Well, thank you very much.
Cool. Guys, if you want to ask a question, type away and then I'll actually unmute you and you can ask your question directly to Pieter. But since I've got the floor, I'm going to ask you a question. And I want to ask you about your winemaking in America and in the UK as well. So what would you say, with quite a broad brush here, what were the biggest surprises to you making wine in those two different environments compared to how you make wine here in South Africa? What's the sort of the biggest changes you've had to make to how you work in general? Where are you in America? Are you in Anderson or Russian River?
I was in Alexander Mountain area, which is just outside Hillsburg. It's a winery called Stone Street.
Okay.
It's one of the Jackson family wineries.
Okay.
And the winemaking there was sort of a little joint operation. It's a little bit of a love affair between Barbara Banke, the heiress to the Jackson family wines, and that of Anthony Beck, who's our Graham Beck's son, who's now at the helm of our businesses. And always said, you know, they needed something in the portfolio of Jackson family wines. If you look at them, you know, they've never been successful in bubbly. So I had the opportunity to go there. So, you know, Alexander Mountain is not like the Anderson Valley, but, you know, the big change in the US to most probably anywhere else, they make it happen. You know, they said, well, you know, we said, well, how do we select our grapes? He says, well, there's a chopper, and we were on a chopper for 2 days, flying all over the AVAs. It's amazing, with a vineyard file this thick, and you know, find the cherries. So we ended up sourcing, in the first year, we sourced from 6 different AVAs. Now California is divided into different AVAs, and we, you know, that is the first year, you know, that's where it approached. So yeah, you know, you don't have to dream, they make it happen, you know, and that's must be the biggest learning that I've taken there. And you know, within the Street Winery, we actually made a dedicated area, and we actually put a little micro winery within their bigger setup, purely for handling the base wines and things like that. So the interesting thing about California still is the variance in altitudes. There's definite merit to be slightly higher. Normally sort of have a reference as the snow line. You know, when winter comes, the sort of snow line is considered to be a very cool area. but the dynamics of the different AVAs definitely gave us a foundation, you know, to learn very quickly which little AVAs will be used in the process. So yeah, that's was probably the biggest thing. Sort of a challenge out there, there's hardly, because, you know, at the snap of the finger, they make it happen, but maybe that is just because the Jackson family operation. But most probably, if there is something that has become a challenge over the last 3 years, there is fires during harvest. Been terrible, really. I think that you can definitely take as a big challenge is the bushfires.
Yeah.
Then obviously UK.
Can I just stick for a second? Sorry, one little supplementary question. In warmer climate areas like California and in South Africa, do you think it's fair to say that the coolness trumps the soil, as it were? So it's more important to get sort of cool areas than it is to necessarily look for these limestone chalky soils that we're always told are so important in Champagne. Is that as important as cool, or is cooler than chalk?
My humble experience out of California, I think it's far more related to proximity to the Pacific Ocean, your fog belts as much. You've probably heard of the Petaluma wind gap, which runs into Caneros, and that is why Caneros is considered such a brilliant area. And you know, we could get grapes from there, and it was the only appellation that I dropped because the Chardonnay clone that was available to us was sort of a Muscati clone, and it was going to be just too flavor or too aromatic for a base wine. So after year one, we actually dropped the Caneros one, but we definitely found. So I think location and position of a vineyard is more important in the US or in California setup than the actual soil, because all their soils are from the later Jurassic era. You know, there is no chalk or anything like that. So it's different to that of the UK.
So yes, the UK. So tell us what your biggest sort of difference was in the UK compared to making wine here. Well,
first of all, you know, with all my travels, and you know, I truly have bubbles in my blood. I'm still in search with that sort of real, where is the ultimate place? And about 4 years ago, I approached Anthony and said, now that the US operation was run, why don't we, you know, the next flavor of the month seems to be the UK. He says, well, okay, let's tour the place. So we took 2 years scouting, looking at virgin land and things like that. But the biggest obstacle in the UK is bureaucracy. I thought it was bad in South Africa, but to get planting permission, planting permissions and things like that would just take forever. So I do believe the UK has got great potential to produce world-class bubblies. So we opted to go sort of in a way of finding the best possible parcels and start making it, till we maybe one day will find something that is suitable for our operation. So it's actually a Graham Beck operation. We call it, it's like a hashtag GB in GB, which I think is quite fitting. And, you know, we went around and again looked at different parcels. And we were very fortunate that we found a guy called Ian Collette. He's the MD of Hambledon. Hambledon happens to be the oldest commercial winery in the UK. I think they started in 1952. And he was prepared to allow us to work in their cellar with their winemaking team. and that we can have the opportunity to source our own grapes. So, you know, I've traveled the areas of Kent through East Sussex, West Sussex, right through to Hampshire. I've been in Wales, I've been in Cornwall, and yeah, it's very true. The same soils that you would find Champagne is prevalent in quite a few areas in the UK, especially Hampshire. Hampshire's most probably the richest deposits. The others are the White Cliffs of Dover. So it sort of goes and sort of not misses Kent. I don't want to say Kent is not the place, but you know, Kent's got much more alluvial soils and a little bit more commisurant clay. But then the bits of chalk then comes out in West Sussex and Hampshire again. So there, I think it's about the location of how much chalk in the soil that you know, produces these brilliant base wines for bubbly.
Okay, cool. Right, I'm going to just as a little side. I suppose when you were investigating good spots in the UK for making wine, I'm assuming that you didn't go up to Yorkshire, which is where I'm from and where I have tasted a sparkling wine. And frankly, you're probably much better off staying in the south. I wouldn't recommend going to Yorkshire for sparkling wine production. I don't think it's going to be a great centre of excellence, let's put it that way. Anyway, I'm going to unmute Debbie Van Flyman, who is in Joburg, also an MW student. Got a techie, a marketing sales question for you. Debbie, you're free, off you go.
Thanks so much, Cathy, and thank you very much, Pieter. I've got a question for you very specifically with respect to MCC and the current COVID crisis, which is pushing sales globally online. And the direct-to-consumer channels are growing very fast. Last night, there was an Institute of Masters of Wine panel, and this was seen everywhere, obviously outside of South Africa, where we completely locked down. So my question to you is what you see the prolonged effects of a ban on alcohol sales domestically doing to the MCC market, both here and abroad?
Yeah, that's a... can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, sure. I don't know what happened there. Yeah, that, you know, with COVID arriving in the Western Cape, and, you know, the sad thing is that we were stopped. We were forbidden to move wine at all. There was a slight glimpse that we could fulfill exports, but even that was then changed at level 5. You know, it was, we weren't allowed to do that. The direct-to-consumer thing is definitely growing worldwide. But again, you know, we've had 6 weeks of, you know, not being able to do any business online. You know, and we hardly now have an opportunity to actually just try and catch up and, you know, get some sales out. So putting that aside, I think the importance of a category like Classique for me is it's taken us some years as an association to build cohesion. And, you know, since last year, we actually developed, within the association, we developed a little marketing, let's call it department, for us able to start making generic drives, because we definitely have learned so much, you know, during COVID, that, you know, you have to become much more proactive. It's going to be a long while before everything is back to normal, if it does get there. But, you know, the prolonged ban on alcohol is really, you know, it's biting us. A lot of wineries in the Western Cape is not going to make it. You know, it's not even rumors. And, you know, we have to just be mindful. But should they be able to give us the channels, you know, like a direct to consumer, where we can trade on the internet, because it's much safer. There's no, you know, social, well, it's the it's most probably the widest social distancing you can do. So, you know, we have a lot of work cut out for us once we can get going again, because, you know, we hopefully can, you know, bring Classique closer to not only our local people, but in the international market as well.
May I follow that up with just 2 quick questions? What is the current percentage of MCC produced in South Africa that is consumed locally versus exported?
If you take, let's take a round figure of 10 million bottles of Classique produced in South Africa, 8 million of that remains in South Africa. 2 million goes into the rest of Africa, Europe, America. I did show a slide earlier on, you know, of the sort of top 20 countries, and then a whole collection of others. So 2 million bottles versus 8 million bottles.
And are you worried about the need for prices to come down in order to move stocks and to generate cash flow during this time?
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you had to listen, if Graham Beck was around, you know, he would always tell you cash is king, you know, so it's tough. Trust me, we all sitting on the edge of our seats to, you know, with running shoes on, to get it up and running. We've lost a lot. And, you know, the government, in whatever sort of decisions they've made, you know, most probably it is a little bit of, you know, a spiteful thing, because, you know, they're losing massive revenue. The contribution of the wine industry into the national fiscus is massive. It's one of the larger contributors to the national fiscus, and they're not getting their money because we can't trade.
Definitely cutting off noses to spite faces, I think, there.
That's a tough one, that. Yeah, it's tough, you know. It's the same as smoking, you know, because now the new thing is, you know, everybody's got a Zoll, you know, we're passing it from one to the other. It's something new, you know, I didn't know it still existed.
It was a whole new word for me, but I thought maybe that's just because I'm an English person, not a South African English person.
It's called Cave, I think.
Okay, I'm going to unmute you, Andrew. You've got another marketing question there as well. Okay, Andrew, you're off. Here you go.
Hi, Peter. Hi, Cathy. Just to follow up to Debbie's comments, the one is just about sparkling wine being typically a celebratory drink and the impact of COVID and lockdown on sales globally, if you know anything about that. And then as a second thing is there's been a lot of talk about the even though people are buying more alcohol, the average bottle price is lowering. And again, with sparkling wines typically being in a higher price category, is there an effect? And has there been a lowering in champagne and other sparkling wine sales globally over the past few months?
Andrew, yeah, thanks for your question, Andrew. I think the effect, you know, your first question was the effect of COVID, if I have it right.
Yeah, because it's a celebratory drink, sparkling wine.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I mean, is that affecting it? We haven't got so much to celebrate these days, I think.
Well, unfortunately, you know, but I have an inkling, I have a bee under my bonnet. I think when we finally get to be up there, we will all be so relieved and we want to celebrate. But, you know, I think bubbly is always, internationally has always been associated as a celebration drink. But, you know, I think we've gone beyond that. It's become part of social life. It's become much more of a lifestyle drink. It has proven to be most probably the better category or wine style to do food and wine pairing with. So it's moved on from that. So, you know, we hope that, you know, after COVID that people will become more happy again. And obviously, you know, hopefully sparkling wine will be first on mind. Regarding your second question, where I should have written some notes.
Peter, it was about the average bottle price.
It's the average bottle price.
Yeah.
Yes, I can tell you what's happened. I think Prosecco has been not a menace, but has definitely sort of shaken the sparkling wine market into understanding price points better. I know, you know, we're all desperate to get back into sales, and trust me, we have meetings on a daily basis on Zoom where we are working out what can we do. And one thing is price. You know, I think price will be affected in some way, that, you know, things won't go up immediately. Some price points in some markets have come down. But I think we definitely, as a Classique, taking the category, I definitely think we have seen that there is a certain sweet spot. Like in the UK, the sweet spot would lie between, let's call it 12 and 18 pounds, you know. So we're getting the Prosecco drink into another category, and hopefully, you know, we can be successful there. But that COVID would have have an influence on price. Maybe even if it's just in the interim, it will be definitely be noticeable, because I think we all so desperately need to have money to look after all our social responsibilities.
I mean, it's interesting that you put Prosecco in there. That obviously that I think has affected the value, maybe to the detriment of traditional method bottles. But just going back to Andrew's first question, I suppose you could argue that actually Prosecco has done everybody a bit of a favour in terms of opening out the occasions when you can drink sparkling wine. I know my sister in the UK drinks Prosecco at the drop of a hat. She drinks it in pubs and it comes out of taps like beer. And I know that's not ideal, and I'm sure that's not where we want MCC to go. But do you think that Prosecco has done a lot of good to the whole sparkling wine, you know, market, just by saying we can drink it whenever? It doesn't have to be that special occasion. I think a lot of that is down to Prosecco.
I cannot disagree. I think Prosecco's been definitely, it's got far more positive contributions to the category of sparkling wine than sort of the negative side. And it also made us realize that, wow, you know, we're punching way beyond our sort of weight when it comes to price point quality ratios. And it's in a way also a wake-up call that we don't need to sell, let's call just the UK as a market. We can't sell our Classique for 10, you know, that belongs to Prosecco. You know, we have to educate the consumer out there that, you know, they are tank fermented wine at 10 pounds to something beautifully that's had 15, 16 months on the lees, naturally fermented at extra $2 or £2. So, you know, that type of scenario does bring. So yeah, it's brought people closer to the category of sparkling again.
I'm just going to unmute here Rebecca Constable, who I see is making a comment. So people who don't know Rebecca and Rob, and Denise, I can unmute you both. Both Rebecca and Rob, they are the buying team for Woolworths here in South Africa. So for people who are not South African, Woolworths is our premium supermarket brand here in South Africa. And you guys, I think probably at the moment, sell more Prosecco than almost any other supermarket I know. How are you finding that whole sparkling category? Is everything growing? Is it Prosecco growing faster, or is MCC growing alongside there? What do you see happening?
Hi, Cathy. Yes, it's a very interesting market, and I think the comment that you made around Prosecco is that it really has come in and actually made the whole sparkling category a bit more accessible to the main market. So it's really sort of put the cat amongst the pigeons, so to speak. I think there is still very much a South African piece around Classique. I think the biggest piece on the consumer part is that, unfortunately, in South Africa at the moment, the customer knows two words: champagne and now Prosecco. So champagne in their world is also under that umbrella, they also put our South African Cup Classique. And I know that Pieter that's one of the things that I think within South Africa that we really need to do is really advertise and get it out there to our customers about how amazing our own local sparkling Cup Classique actually is. But yeah, it's Prosecco very much from a price perspective has really driven some of the sales that we've seen, but we have seen growth across the category. Also, we launched Cup Classique with Benang. So when you see the influence of an influencer, it's also really disrupted the market. But also on the other end, the sparkling wine category from a price perspective is also doing well.
Right. Okay. Cool.
I just want to, I think one thing I neglected to answer Andrew regarding his second question. The interesting thing, that I said the contribution that Prosecco brought into the sparkling wine thing, the champagne guys realize now that, if you look at the change of their direction, is champagne's becoming more expensive, but they do believe that, they need to belong there and not fight. If we take the UK market, they're not trying to fight the English wine. English wine's going to naturally have its own little price point, and then above that, champagne's going to be, that is sort of a direction I'm also starting to see.
So that then leads me on to my next question. What direction, where to next for MCC? What do you think is going to be the most sort of important trends sort of coming up in MCC? Is it going to be sweeter styles? Is it going to be drier styles? Is it going to be blanc de blanc? Is it going to be, like Rebecca says, having influencers involved? Because I know that, the whole case study of Benang and the fizz that she's doing with Woolworths is awesome. There's really, really interesting sort of growth here. Where do you think that we're going to go with MCC? What's the future? Give us all your trade secrets.
Yeah, if my crystal ball is completely open, but it's so flippin', sometimes you see the right thing and sometimes you don't see anything at all. But what I do and what we do see as a category in South Africa, especially on the local market, is there's a new style, and I can't really call it a style because it's related about the sweetness and sweet level. There's a category called nectar. Now, it's interesting that Moet and Chandon has one called their nectar imperial.
Imperial, yeah.
And that sort of, Rebecca referred to the main market. That definitely is got a little bit more sweetness. If you analyze it, it's most probably got around 30 to 35 grams per liter of sugar. And all of a sudden in South Africa, that category and nectar was sort of taken for a wine with slightly more sugar. Now, there is no classification for nectar in South Africa, because again, it's related to that chart I showed you with the level of sweetness. But nectar is born out of a sort of a demi-sec style, where obviously it has more sugar. And that is definitely, it's flying. In the main markets, that is definitely, where you used to sell 2 dry wines to 1 sweet one, it's changing, it's virtually 2 to 1.
Cool. And what about, there's another question that people ask a lot as well. Rosé, Rebecca's saying too, so I don't know if you see that as a growth area as well. What about different size bottles? I was reading a very interesting article yesterday, actually about rosé, but still rosé wines in larger formats. Are you seeing more people interested in buying magnums or half bottles? Is that an interesting thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. In sparkling wine, I think rosé category is definitely, I think it's sort of slightly stabilized. although there is still a growth pattern, but it's slightly stabilized. But you know, prior up to the last four years, it's really had a huge upward curve. And one of the I would put to that, it's people eat and drink with their eyes. So, you know, color is part of the attraction.
Yeah.
And that definitely, you know, has brought a lot of interest into rosé. In the US market, if you walk the US market, the rosé category 10 years ago was three months long, and then the shelves were cleared and rosé was only brought back the next summer. Now it has got like 3 aisles just of rosés, you know, from the Provençal areas, wherever they are. So yeah, there is an interest in that. Regarding bottle sizes, keep in mind that it is not as simple as in still wine. The sparkling wine or Classique bottle or champagne bottle is much heavier and it's more expensive. So when you are buying a Magnum glass bottle to fill that, the price is not double. It's invariably, you know, 2.5 times the price because of the weight and the pressure that a Magnum bottle must hold. So I'm a lover. I wish, you know, all my bubbly that I can drink could come from a Magnum.
Me too.
It's been proven to be the best size in relation to the neck of the bottle. It's got the exact same shape as a 750. So you have half of the amount of air, and that is why a Magnum matures just so much more longer and so much more beautiful. Regarding half bottles, they're a little bit more tricky. Again, a half bottle is not half the price because, you know, you also need a cork and wire. And again, it's, you know, it's most probably, you know, 1.5 times. It's not half the price. But a half bottle is tricky. The maturation curve in half bottles is definitely twice as quick as 750s. And you have to just be mindful about that. So, you know, I think half bottles would be working great if you had a restaurant and you wanted to get Classique under people's noses. You can, you know, you can manage it much better. But 750 to a Magnum is much more considered the better size bottle.
My favourite quote, I think, is about Magnums. Was a Magnum is perfect for 2 people if only one of them's drinking.
Yeah, that is, you know, that was old Winston Churchill, you know.
Yeah, well, that's a point. Yeah.
Yeah, he was quite a raconteur, and you know, he had a love affair with Paul Roger, and you know, but there's many stories we can say.
Okay, Rob from Woolworths again. Rob, you wanted to chip in on the styles and marketing. Come and.
Yeah, so I think the Classique Association in South Africa in general, we've done huge amounts of work on quality. But one thing, and I was very relieved to hear Pieter saying that the Classique Association is going to be spending more money on sort of generic marketing for the category as opposed to the individual members. And I think traditionally we've always gone out as individual producers and try to market ourselves. And I think what Champagne and Prosecco have done extremely well is they've sold a lifestyle rather than a drink, where we're still in the drink space. So I think we've done a lot of the good groundwork, but now we need to give the people the lifestyle to follow up with it. And I think that's all work in progress on your side there, Pete.
Yeah, Robbie, it's a very, very good, valid question. You know, I know, since we've got this marketing arm, you know, as winemakers, we have some ideas, but, you know, our sort of primary focus is quality, making sure that the category is healthy, and, you know, to make sure that, you know, we can grow and make sure when you buy Classique, you're going to be a happy customer. And only since we've had the marketing arm now, it has really daunted us and says, my God, so little people know about Classique. So we're working definitely much closer to the marketeers of the brands. But, you know, funding is and remains always an issue. You know, we've recently also changed our model of membership to the association, where we're working on a little levy, which means for every bottle that you sell, 2 cents of that goes into a marketing plan. So all of a sudden, from where we were running a little association just to tick over, now all of a sudden we can develop funds, and, you know, must probably come and knock on Woolworth's door to help us. You know, it is a strong category for all of you, and I think we have had these conversations. So thanks for bringing it under our attention, because definitely, you know, we need to get it out to the consumer. It's alive. Classique is growing in double-digit figures, and you know, show me a still wine that's showing the same performance. There is none.
I think that's a perfect note on which to end this discussion, Pieter, because I couldn't agree more. I certainly do my bit to drink as much as possible, and I am certain that everybody else on this Zoom call does the same as well. So I'm going to wrap it up there. We're going to make it available on our website somehow or other. I'm not techie, I don't know, but there will be a means to get hold of this recording on www.thewinecentre.co.za, and then we're going to make it available to Pieter as well. So you're going to put this on the classique.co.za or something like that, or on Graham Beck, or still working that one out?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we have a members page on our website, which is classique.co.za. Some really nice, interesting material on there, and we'll make sure it's available to our members.
Fantastic. And I just want to say that on behalf of everybody, we had about 70 or 80 people on here earlier, and obviously some people have had to go off to other Zooms, but this has been awesome. It's just been awesome, Pieter. It really has. Just to listen to you and to hear what you're saying and what you're thinking it's been fantastic. I've loved it. I learned stuff all the time when I listen to you, and I know that everybody else has been doing it as well. You can see on the chat, everybody has had a great time. So thank you so much for your time. It's been awesome. Thank you, Pieter, as well, who's now muted again. Sorry, because you were making funny noises. And I hope everybody's enjoyed it. If you are still to sit your WSET Level 3, please carry on studying, guys, and make sure that whatever you do, you learn about bubbles, because A, they're fantastic, B, they're coming up, I can promise you. And for people on Level 4, I hope it's the same. Thanks so much, Pieter, for your time. You are a star. This is the end of it. Okay.
Thank you, Cathy, and thank you for listening, everyone. Have a nice day.
Cool. Bye, everyone.
Bye.